Thank you for taking the time to attend today's webinar on Position Budget Manager from S3 to Global HR. Hope you enjoy this, and without further ado, I give you Melissa and Jana.
Cool, thank you, Keith. So today we are talking about the budget manager. So position management in S3, and we'll spend a little bit of time on that, but the main bulk of the presentation will be, Jana will be going over what's new or what GHR is bringing to you in the position management module, position budget management module in GHR. So with that, we'll go ahead and kick it off.
Yeah, so there's two main uses for Position Budget Manager. You can use it on the one hand just to set up positions and monitor as people come in and out of positions, or you can have a stronger usage of it where you're actually enforcing your budget controls as people are entering transactions into the system and trying to make hires from talent acquisition into GHR.
The clicker's not working.
What am I doing wrong? Well, it would help if I turned it on, wouldn't it? Daggone it. There we go.
These presentations are live, you guys, as you can see. No
Sorry,
delays.
First time using. So we've got the usual who, what, how, when, where, and lessons learned for us to kind of take us through. But first, Melissa's going to talk a little bit about S3 position management.
Yep, so if you're not familiar with position management at all, what is it? It's a term that's used that it just is the collection, the analysis, management of all of your personnel information. So it not only includes the budget piece or the headcount piece, but it really encompasses the position rules, your job rules, your defaulting. All of that is encompassed under the position management umbrella. And we're going to go through a little bit on, how the setup and maintenance of the decisions you make when you initially create your positions and your position rules and your defaulting, how those will impact your entire organization. Okay, so there's not a lot in S3 for position management. There are a few screens. There are two screens, in fact, and there's a little bit on the position. I'm not going to go too much into the position because everybody is mostly aware of what's available there and some of the position budgeting. But what I did want to go through is on your position rules where the position management or position control pieces come in. So if you see here on position PA06, position rules, you will have a screen that you'll be able to fill out depending on your whole organization, or if, say, you just want one piece of your organization. Maybe there are a bunch of affiliates that run kind of on their own, but they're rolled up under one company. You can have position budgeting rules for one organization or one process level or even just one department in your organization, and everybody else can go without any budgeting or any control. So it's not all or nothing, just be aware of that. So if you did want to have, maybe you've got a manager that kind of just goes rogue and hiring people and always is trying to borrow FTEs from other areas to pay for some in their area, you can tighten all of that down just for that manager, that department, or that process level. So here, this is saying you do need to be using positions. So if you're only using jobs, in order to get this functionality, you do need to set up formal positions and then put the rules behind them. You see, if you go back one real quick, we'll be doing, these are just the counts for how many positions you have, and then below that is going to be for your multiple positions. So if you do want to use multiple positions at your organizations and you want to be able to use the FTE and headcount for people that have multiple positions, you can do that. Or if you just care about their primary position, because that will be the one with the highest FTE, or maybe the multiple positions are being shared, so they're not long-term or permanent. Maybe they're just going out somewhere for 3 weeks, a month, whatever it may be, but that's not a permanent multiple position. Then you can just select primary position only for the head counts. Okay. The next tab on there are your limits, and this is just the easiest way to put just a little bit of a guardrail around your positions. on your defaulting rules, you can determine whether or not this is a driver for you. So if you want an override, if somebody tries, here, my example, I have a headcount max of 5, but say I want to hire, as a manager, I want to hire a 6th person. My department has grown in the last 3 months and the budget doesn't reflect that. And the work for my department has grown and the budget doesn't reflect that for my headcount. I can, as an HR administrator, have a soft edit on that says, okay, we'd like 5, our budget says 5, but if somebody needs to hire a 6th, we can go ahead and override that. Or you can put those in the defaulting rules as to say, no more positions. After 5 headcount are full, nobody can use a requisition to open a new position for this area. So I can see my headcounts and then also my FTEs. So I might have 5 headcounts, but they might be at 0.5 each. So I'd have 10 FTEs max at that point. And this was a 1-to-1. Okay, and then our next one is our counts, and this will help with your reporting. There are a few reports that come out of here that you can compare, your head count, and I'm going to go in a couple of slides and show you exactly where you can put the salaries for each of these positions, so it can match up to a budget. And that's where you'll use some of the budgeting options here. And then down in your counts, again, do you want your terminated employees to show up? Terminated employees that were in those positions. Employees that are on leave or inactive positions, do you want those to show up? So here you can just define, when you call, what do you refer to as a head count? Generally, all of your active employees, and that's where you'll define. And the last tab here is on payroll, and that's, again, just to kind of close the loop and pass everything over to the payroll system for the actual budgets that will be closed out in finance. So you can attach, activities, their expense accounts, pay rate, or again, leave it a little looser if you really just care about keeping it just to headcount or position number on your position budgeting or position control. Okay, so this is the one that I was telling you where you would be able to set up your budget. So every year when you get your allotted amount for however many positions in your organization or your department, you would go into PA70 and set up your position budget per position. So, and you don't have to do it for every position. You can only do it for the ones that you're concerned that will go over budget. So if you have, hourly positions that no matter what, no matter who's in it, they're always making $14 an hour, you don't have to worry about that. But your salaried positions that maybe people might negotiate higher salaries to come into that position, and that might throw you out of your budget. Where are you going to take money from? This will help you kind of understand where those lines are. So in this case, I've got a business analyst position. I have added a line item here for actually last year's budget. So my fiscal year is 1/1 to 12/31 essentially, and that's what I'm putting here. And that's what you would put in for your begin and end date as your fiscal year. And then how many head count I have allotted in my budget and how many FTEs that is. And then the next one's authorized headcount and FTE. You can leave those blank and they will update along with the budgeted headcount and budgeted FTE. And it gives you a little more leeway to say, I've got 10 budgeted headcount here, but you know what? I'm going to break up the FTEs because I don't have enough work for a full-time person. Will allow me, even though I have my budgeted 1 FTE per position, that if I don't put an authorized FTE in there, then I can say, you know what, I've got 10 positions, but I'm going to have, 0.25 FTEs, and that allows me the freedom without the rules of somebody saying I have to have a 1 FTE for every position. And then down at the bottom, you'll see my salaries. I can put the budgeted amount for each of those positions, so I can tie that back to the fiscal side. Okay. So that was in a nutshell. Again, I told you there's two reports. I didn't put them in here just because They're not too interesting, but they're PA 270, PA 271, and PA 272, and that will give you all of your variants and your listings.
Sorry, I got a couple questions.
Sure.
Right before we move on to GHR, which sounds like it's coming up next. So some people have set up position budgeting in S3, but not very many, right? So
Right.
There's limitations that people have found in trying to use it to meet their requirements. And you can expand on that a little bit.
Well, and I think, that's kind of why I wanted to really talk about not needing to be, can you not hear? Okay.
So the question was, we have not seen position budgeting deployed widely in the market in S3. Right. And it's because it has some limitations. And so what is it about S3 position budgeting? I'm assuming that we're going to learn from GHR that does a lot more that is limiting.
So there's not a lot it does in tying back to fiscal. It's really just
a repository for numbers.
A repository, and it can give you those soft edits. That's kind of why I wanted to just, if people are using it, they can be aware that they don't have to use it for the whole organization. They can use it just for one department or just for one process level, and that might make it a little bit easier to use because maybe your whole organization doesn't need those budget restraints. And also, you could use it just for the head counts and not necessarily tie it back to your budget. So you can, there's not a lot that it does, but you don't even have to use everything there. It's not an all or nothing, and I think people get a little, it seems like an overwhelming task to bring in budgets for every single position and set them up, and in order for it to work, and that's not necessarily the case. You can just use it for head counts. You don't have to use it for every single position. You can just use it for the positions that you're really concerned that would go over budget or that are kind of spiraling out of control.
Thank you.
Definitely. So there's definitely a little bit more functionality in GHR on the GHR side. This is just a screenshot of the process board that you'll see if you have the position budget manager access. And just to get to that, there's a couple of security roles that can give you access to this. The administrator role obviously gives you access to everything. Recruiters have some built-in functionality related to position budget manager in the talent acquisition module. But for really your main administrator for your position budgets, you're going to want to assign the position budget manager role to them, because if they're an HR generalist, the HR generalist role doesn't have access to it as delivered. There's a couple other roles. You can have position site administrators. Maybe you're an extremely large organization and you have people who have control over one factory or one location. You can
So if they have a decentralized kind of HR,
correct,
where everybody has their own HR department at their location potentially.
Yeah, and somebody's really responsible for keeping an eye on the head counts and the budget in their location. This is kind of a dual role. You set them up with the position site administrator role, and then you give them certain organization units that they have access to. They would be responsible for the budget for that. And then kind of inherent, on the approval side, you can have people who are just budget approvers, so they don't have access to the full scope of functionality, but they are able to approve.
So maybe this would be somebody on the finance side that we've set up on HR positions in our budget, but finance wants to say, okay, let me give the final say and make sure that you got the budget right or whatever. You can give that to somebody outside the HR group. Okay.
Yeah, and then kind of inherent in the manager and the HR generalist role, there is some approval capabilities as well from security. So the managers and the HR generalists are the ones initiating potentially the personnel actions that would impact your budget counts. So that's kind of their role. A couple other prerequisites to setting up. On your relationship status field, there is a headcount field that can be active, not active, or excluded. And you're going to want to say for each of your relationship statuses, are these part of my position budget management or not? Now, know that whether you select active or not active, they will be included in the turnover data. And the position budget accounts only excluded is going to exclude them from both turnover reports and your position budget management. The other field you can work with is the assignment type. Again, we'll find in a little bit, neither of these are, this one especially is not required. But if you're using assignment types and you want to use this as an additional delineator, you can say whether or not it would be included or excluded in budget counts. As a position site administrator, I kind of mentioned this, that you give them the role, but then you also have certain org units that are tied to that actor that gives them access for that. And you can streamline the assignment of those org units by just assigning the top level org unit, and it'll give them all
Cascade all the others down.
Underneath them, correct. Position budget action reasons, just another set of action reason codes that you can set up in your system. An example, if somebody's rejecting a request, would be, this isn't budgeted. So you can put in stuff that you could report off of and help keep track of in your own metrics and analytics. So position budget plans. This is the first main part of your setup. The position budget plans is where you're going to define the position budget and the controls for specific time period, usually a fiscal year. For some, that might be January 1 to December 31st. For others, it might be June 1 or July 1 till June 30th of the following year. This is where you indicate what planning level. There's several different levels you can choose from. And you can decide if you want your talent acquisition transactions to be included or not. And you can monitor it by either FTE, headcounts, or salaries, or a combination of them. And then there's multiple budget control rules that you can implement. If they're exceeded, you can prevent actions, or you can force an approval process. If you want to impose the FTE limits on the employees, you can do that. You can exclude non-primary work assignments from some of the counts. And then when a job requisition or an application begins to be counted for budgets, you can set up control rules around that as well. So here's an example of a position budget plan. You can see the planning levels, this drop down, and there's several different combinations. This one is selected by organization, unit, and position. And you can see the use by talent acquisition is not checked, so they're not getting involved with that. And they've selected to budget by FTE rather than headcount or salary.
So this is giving us a lot more than we had in S3. I'm seeing, just even it's making it easier to create a budget or a position control or position management just around certain groups of positions or certain parameters, as opposed to maybe just all of a process level or all of a department. This would even probably let you use it by employee groups.
Yeah, it's much more flexible around that. I'm trying to think if there's a custom group section. I don't think you define initially. You can do just organization unit or just position or org unit and position together. Yeah. So then some of the properties, you saw the status there. The budget start date, again, is related to your fiscal year. You can, if you activate it, it causes the current budget counts to be calculated off of that plan. So you can have a plan set up as preliminary in a different status, and it can sit there for a while and nothing will act against it.
So then maybe if you get your budgets a couple of months early, you can initially set it up, but until they're approved, you leave them kind of in an inactive state.
Correct.
And then you just flip that switch when those numbers are right. So you can do a lot of that pre-work.
Yeah.
Okay, that's nice. Yeah.
Definitely.
There's definitely not an inactive status on the other side. It's kind of all or nothing on
all
S3.
Or nothing. Yeah. So you can definitely inactivate a plan if it's no longer the correct plan for you. And there's also just something I thought of. Your budget start date must be inside of your position plan date range for it to work together. So here's the Rules tab, and you can see there is functionality to just select a particular org unit branch. So kind of like in S3, you can just do this for one part of your organization if you don't want to do all of it.
Okay.
For budget control rules, you can select, do not compare or compare, and then it asks, if you're comparing, do you compare to the FTE, the headcount, or the salary? And some of the same limit fields that we were seeing in S3 as well. This was one of the first new modules to the talent management suite after they came out with the 5 core modules back in the day, because this was used, I guess, by some people in S3, and they were like, give this to us now. So you'll see there's a lot of similar functionality, but hopefully enhanced and more flexible in the GHR world. So position level, you can select job only or position only or org unit or a combination of those three. For plan roles, if you define it for an org unit branch, it applies to all the org units under that branch. So if you select the top level, if it's not associated with any org unit branches, it's going to apply to all the org units associated with that plan role.
Okay.
So here's a sample budget plan that was uploaded, and you can kind of see once you've created your plan and you've uploaded your data, you're going to see some descriptors. And over here you've got your FTEs, and this is a modified list definition. We've pulled in some extra fields here for this client, so you can make it, flexible for how you need it and export it to audit and double check. You also, once you've uploaded it, you have in your position budgets, you now have a budget plan and you have the data that you've loaded into it.
So it'll always stay there. So for historical purposes, if I need to go back and see what my plan looked like 2 years ago, because essentially maybe 2 years ago I had the same budget numbers as I have this year, I can kind of look back and see how everything was set up.
It's hard to delete anything in GHR once it's in there. Come Friday to our data correction. We'll tell you how to clean stuff up a little bit. So position planning levels, again, just, you have some flexibility to do an org unit branch or org unit with a job, org unit with a position, combination. So budget control rules. This is this next one. Oh, sorry. We were laughing at this meme. This is your manager that's being told no, and he's running off to recruit somebody.
I'm going to go get somebody right now before those rules are in place.
Exactly. So this is from the user guide, but just wanted to walk you through a little bit so that you could understand how the budget controls rule. So you have somebody initiate an action. Maybe it's a hire. And the first thing, if you've got budget control rules in place, the first thing the system's going to do is take a look at, okay, is there an active position plan for this effective date or not? If not, there's no issues. If there is, it's going to go look at what are the plan rules for that position plan. Does anything apply? Do you have it set to compare or not compare? Not compare? No problem. You're just using it to track. It's not going to impact any of your action requests. Oh, they have compare. So now we got to go look for the budget for that position and take a peek at that. Is that going to knock anything out? Nope, not going over budget when we hired this person in, so you're fine. The action can say, oops, okay, you're hitting up against a limit now. And you can define or configure whether you want it to go through approvals or not at that point. So this kind of gives you a
that's kind of
visual.
your soft override in S3 where we have enforce the rule but let it override. This point you actually have an approval process that lets you override. So it's not the person who's trying to get the extra position that's overriding it.
Correct.
You'll be able to show in your audit logs that, okay, somebody needed another FTE. It went to the position budget manager
approver.
and somebody in either finance or in HR approved this FTE. That's nice. Yeah.
Gives you the flexibility to go over.
Okay.
So just to revisit those two prerequisites we mentioned, the headcount value has to be active or not active, can't be excluded, and the work assignment, if you're using that, must be either blank or included to not hold up. And again, here are the three values. Do not compare, restrict a budget, or allow variance with approval. That lets you trigger the process flow.
And that flow is out of the box. You don't have to configure any, you don't have to create a new flow like a new IPA flow to get that approval. That's already part of the module.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Great.
But people usually like to tweak it a little bit. But yeah, there is something there for you to work with.
And I guess if you want to tweak it, if you don't want a specific person or if you want multiple people to potentially approve if somebody's out or proxy or something like that, that's when you'd want to do some
Or
tweaks.
by org unit.
Okay.
This person's the approver over this part of the company.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Lots of variation.
Okay.
So just to know, the actions in GHR that can trigger these budget control rules are hiring, rehire, changing relationship to org, and creating work assignment. Off the work assignment record, if you're transferring, promoting, changing a pay rate, or adding a work assignment, all of those can interact with these controls.
Okay.
On the talent acquisition side, there are several onboarding actions that also interact with the position budget manager controls. So hiring somebody, rehiring, transferring, and adding a work assignment. And whether or not you tell it to be used by talent acquisition, these are still going to trigger the controls because these are actually moving them into GHR and working in GHR.
So if I'm using a third party and I'm interfacing my hires in, I'm still going to be using a rehire
Right.
action, and it's coming from some other recruiting system, but it'll still enforce
Once you
that.
invoke that action,
Okay.
it'll
So you
go against
don't
these
necessarily
rules.
need talent acquisition, but it's all nice and
Right.
included if you do.
Yeah. So there's nice, where it does come into play in talent acquisition is around requisition setup. So you can set up requisitions to be budgeted or not
Okay.
down here. And that's going to trigger some of the additional functionality and rules in there. There's also another setup here. And Matt Slazak, shout out to Matt, who really has worked more with the talent acquisition rec setup. And so he was giving us some pointers on this. But you've got these included when in the counts. You've got several different varieties that you can choose from depending on what your preference is. The requisitions and applicants field in the budget control section works in conjunction with this include and when counts field to determine when the budget control is enforced. So you can enforce it when the rec is approved. You can enforce it when the offer is pending, the offer is defined, offer is accepted.
And that makes a lot of sense
Yeah.
because it's, you want to have a rec out there because your final candidate, until they actually onboard, they may not show up. So you want to be able to still leave that headcount open to recruit somebody until you've got somebody as part of your company. So
Correct.
I can see where all that flexibility is helpful.
Yeah, Matt was saying he's seen extremes on both ends. So he's seen people that want it right at the beginning, and then he's seen people that don't even want it to come into play until that person has actually walked through the front door because maybe they have a lot of no-shows for a particular type of position. So until that person's in the door and really
Yeah.
on board, then they'll kind of close the budget at that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Just a little bit more information for you to take a look at in your own free time. Some details around these including counts when and how they work a little bit. But some tips and tricks for using this. So as I mentioned before, even if your position plan doesn't have that include in TA, those few actions, the hire, the rehire, the transfer, and adding a work assignment will still be subject to those budget controls. The effective date of the action, that is what determines the appropriate position plan and budget for GHR and TA. So if you're having problems like, why is this applying, go look at your effective date.
And if the effective date might be last budget year, they're trying to do some sort of retro action.
Yeah.
And maybe the budget's already closed and the headcounts are full. And it's
Absolutely.
not letting them move somebody over or something. So
Correct.
that might need to go through some sort of
Approval.
approval.
Yeah.
Okay.
And fix the data from the old plan or something to
Right.
get that to go right.
Okay.
The non-onboarding TA actions, for those, the requisitions date, needed value, or the job application employment start date is used. Otherwise, just the system date. And then finally, for the FTE limits, that's going to be enforced for all actions that may affect the FTE. That's a hard limit. So you want to be aware of that. In recruiter space, as we mentioned before, the recruiters are going to interact with this when the rec is created. And that's probably the only time between that and then when they hire our candidate will be the next time they would interact with those position budget control rules. So if there's a situation where they're trying to hire and there isn't enough headcount, recruiters will get an error message, but otherwise they don't really have any insight throughout the whole recruiting process until they come to the hire point. So if something changes after they've initially created the rec, they won't know till they start trying to hire that candidate in that, the headcount's been changed, and just something to be aware of. In manager space, they'll interact with this when they're approving a requisition potentially, if you're using talent acquisition, or when they're approving an action request, and some of those budget control rules come into play. In generalist or administrator space, if they've been given the position manager role, they'll interact with the whole back end of it. There are a couple delivered reports. The first one is the budget net changes. So you can see in this screenshot, a client thought they had to load an initial, like this is our budget, and then, oh, this is our amended budget. But there's actually a report built in for that. So you can just load one budget per year, and then you can run this net changes report throughout the year and see like, oh, we started off with 1 in this position, and then we increased it to 6 for whatever reason, and kind of keep track of your changes that way. The budget variance report is what's going to come into play to show that your positions actually filled against your budget are in sync or not. Maybe there's a position that's not filled, or there's a position that's overfilled, and those will come out. You'll see some of these error messages here. So this one has 3.3 staff, and it was budgeted for 5. They've got some additional availability there. This one goes the other way. There was no budget, but there's somebody sitting in this position, and so it's alerting you.
So who would normally get this report other than your budget manager, position budget manager?
That's it.
Is that it? That doesn't go out to the managers, or so they can say, oh, I can play a shell game here with some of my FTEs?
As delivered, this is just on the back end, but as you guys talked about in your report, check out our report webinar yesterday that Matt and Melissa did. You can create a report from this and put this out for anybody to access, within the security rights that they have for the data. One thing you can also do to modify this report, some organizations maybe only want to budget for salaried and not hourly staff. And because this is a list definition, you can go in and filter to just display your salaried here. And I think that's partly why some of these are showing as not budgeted, because they're hourly people that they didn't load a budget for.
Okay.
I think so. And then there's your plan comparisons. Now these are cube reports, so you have to have a refresh process set up to populate them with data on a regular basis. They're generated, by an analytics cube. So your administrator will typically schedule your cube refreshes at regular intervals, but you could of course always make changes and ask them to refresh it quickly to see what changes you'd made. So a couple of GHR lessons learned. The one organization I've been working with recently did a reorg in December, and all of a sudden their position variance report was all out of whack, and they couldn't figure out why. And we realized, oh, you have people, because you reorged, the budgets that were loaded against a certain org unit aren't really valid, and we have to fix that so that where people are now matches up. So just something to be aware of if you're using that leveling of position and org unit.
Put that on your checklist of everything you need to do when you're moving your org.
Yeah, when you do an org unit, then go update your position budget with those new org units as well.
Okay.
Salaried versus hourly budgets, I mentioned how you can modify the variance report to exclude if you're not loading budgets for hourly, for example. But there's a process you have to run. Just uploading the changes or making a change isn't the whole story. There's a build process called build position plan assigned resources that you have to run, and that's what helps sync up your plan with all your current filled positions. So be sure to run that regularly after each change. And then the FTE versus the headcount versus the salary. GHR, because payroll's just coming up, but it's not there yet. The salary comparison is not going to be a true salary comparison like it might have been in S3.
Right, it'll
because
look at
you can't see
rates.
overtime pay. You can only see like projected earnings, an annual
Right.
salary amount or an hourly rate.
Okay.
So really, until you have payroll in the system, you're better off with managing by FTE or headcount for more exact. And a couple final TA lessons learned. As we mentioned before, there can be changes between the point the rec is approved and when you go to hire an employee, so something to be aware of in managing that.
And I guess that could happen if you have multiple recruiters working on multiple recs for the same budgeted headcount bucket, right? So if somebody's grabbed 2 people and you wanted to grab 1 and there's only 2 headcount, you're out of luck there.
Yeah, or finance comes back, we got to cut 5% across the board. We're taking all the positions out. And then the variance report, there's back here, there's an updated through flag. There's these pending requisition column here and this future commitment columns that some people like and some people don't like. So some people feel like the pending rec column really isn't real. Somebody could have just put something in, it's not approved yet. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's a real rec.
Some draft rec out there.
Yeah. So again, you can just configure this column out if you don't want it. And then the pending actions or the future commitments is what shows you, okay, somebody's put in an action request for against this position, and it may or may not be approved.
Oh, and it might just be out there waiting for the effective date to come up. So it might just be sitting
True,
there
that
pending, and it's going to be good in 2 weeks when the promotion is effective or something.
Yeah, so that's
Okay.
something gives you a little bit better information, like, ooh, something's going on here, so I need
Yeah.
to be aware of that.
Okay.
And then that's it for taking you
Yeah.
through. Do we have any questions?
We do.
Excellent.
Okay, great. We'll wait for Mr. Getty or Mr. Whalen.
Yes, we do.
Stump the chump time.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Can you include requisitions upon approval but exclude applications when reviewing budget counts and variances?
So
That makes
exclude all the applications that have come against an open position, essentially, I'm thinking? I would
Yeah,
think so.
I don't think it looks at applicants.
Yeah, and you had your drop down there, and applicants or candidate amount wasn't one of those. It's basically once either the requisition has been opened or closed, or they're in some state of
I think
hire.
it's not until you go to fill a position in the rec that the budget rules kick in. So just having applications doesn't trigger anything.
Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah.
Any other?
I'm double checking.
Okay.
All right, great. In the meantime, I want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank Jan and Melissa for a wonderful presentation.